Something that God really pressed deep into my heart that I've communicated to our team is that I just hope that we always have a culture where connection precedes content, where connection always happens before content is ever delivered. And I know that's happening over in our kids space. Let's go ahead and just raise the roof and let them hear us from here, that our kids ministry team, that if you dropped a kid off in our kids ministry space that they've been connected with and loved, and they know their names already, and they're learning how they're playing together with different toys and items before they get into God's Word, because connection is the pathway to content, right? And I just want to also just shout out Julianne for leading our worship team so well. Connection doesn't always just precede content in the way of just you and I, but in the way of us to God, right? And I just feel like I was just connected in a next level way during that worship set. And so thank you guys for leading us so great. But we also, I just wanted to take this moment right now as well to make sure that if this is your first time, or maybe it's your first time, maybe you've been coming and you've never filled out a connection card, that this isn't just a stale piece of paper that gets filed in a cabinet. This is something that we would like to take, and we would like to reach out to you to make sure that you really, truly do feel connected at Favor City, that you're on the pathway to maybe you want to look at discovering what it looks like to jump into a group next semester, or like maybe your family's going through something and you just need some prayers. But whatever it is, and whatever the next step for you to connect to our church, just fill that out and drop it in the offering box on the way out. It can be your gift to us today. And just make sure that you give us that information so that we can connect, that we can help start that journey to you, for you to feel like this is your church family, okay? So you do that. They're in the seat pockets in front of you. You can grab some pens. If you don't have one, they're in the back as well. And so I can't believe that we're already almost to 2022. Isn't that crazy? Like we're wrapping up the year, all of the craziness, the traffic around. We went to a parade at downtown Summerlin with the kids, and like the traffic was atrocious. And, Target is becoming just a feeding frenzy, right? It's just like things are just like really heating up for the holidays. And as we think about the holidays, here's what I know. And I want to start us out with this tension statement as we jump into the truth this morning, is that the Christmas season, if we are not careful, can become more about presentation than it is about presence. And that's a presence with a CE, not a TS. That Christmas can become more about the presentation than it is about the presence. I love the TV show, I really don't watch it a whole lot, but I'm more in love with the concept of it than I am the actual show. But have you ever seen the show or heard of the show Undercover Boss? And basically the premise is this, is that the undercover boss, he's this big time investor. He owns a lot of different businesses like restaurants and things like that. And he'll identify one of his businesses that is not doing super well, right? Either financially they're not doing well, they're getting bad reviews or whatever. And so what this boss will do is he disguises himself as a new employee and comes into this business of his, and he presents himself in a way of like, okay, I'm this new employee of the business. You're onboarding me into your process. Like, I'm getting to know your systems. I'm seeing your product. I'm helping you make it. And by doing that, he learns what is going wrong in that business, right? He presents himself as just like one of the workers, as just one of the guys. He comes in and he's undercover. And then what they realize in this grand reveal, after they really, show not their best side to their boss, is that they realize this was actually the CEO of the company all along. Right? How embarrassing, right? Now, if he had pulled up in a limousine or zipped up in a Tesla, right, and jumped in and started barking orders, they would have probably presented themselves in a much different way, right? We know how to pull it together, put on a show for the boss. But what I love about the premise of this show, and what is so intriguing about it, is he presents himself in a way where he understands and he's able to actually see what exactly is going on and what is going wrong, right? And he's able to get a bead on what is making this business not succeed. And if we jump into the scriptures this morning in John chapter 1, what we're going to find is that Jesus actually steps into the scene in a way where he's able to see exactly what is going on in his world that he created. He's able to see all the mess ups. He's able to see authentically what his followers, what his people have been doing. And I think that what had happened is that it had become, just their life in general had become more about presentation than it did about presence. It had become more about the frill than it had become about what was authentically supposed to be displayed as a life of somebody who was in love with their Creator. And so Jesus was able to identify this, and I think that this morning, maybe we can all just together, collectively, have a Grinch moment this morning. I don't know, like after he goes on his mission down to Whoville and he steals all the presents and he steals all the decorations and then he gets back up to Mount Crumpet, right? And he realizes, like he starts to hear this sound and all the people of Whoville come out and he hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came just the same, right? It came without packages, boxes, or bags. Like it came just the same, and he's confused in what has this realization. He said, maybe Christmas, in fact, doesn't come from a store. What if Christmas perhaps is a little bit more, right? You guys need to brush up on your Grinch. We've been watching it every day because my son loves it. And he has that realization, though, that Christmas is more about presence than it is about presentation. So John chapter 1, Jesus presents himself to the world. John chapter 1, verse 14, and I'm going to stop at the first half of this verse as we kick off. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. I love the way I've heard this paraphrased before. It says that God put on human clothes and he moved into the neighborhood. That the Word became flesh and he dwelt among us. That God is with us. Not just in spirit, in flesh and bone and blood. He is with us. The Word became flesh. We talked about how the Word, it says in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? And everything that has been made was made through and by Him, right? So the Word is Jesus, and Jesus stepped down in this moment. It says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, right? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and he has this undercover boss moment. He steps into the world, and I'll back up to verse 9, and it says this: the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Here's what you need to know about when Jesus stepped down into our world, into his creation. When he stepped down, there is light enough for everyone. That every living being was made in the image of God. And when he stepped down into the world, that true light was for everyone, right? I'm just picturing, I don't know what your favorite holiday movies are, but I'm just picturing Will Ferrell as Elf sitting in that little school desk, right? And they're reciting the code of the elves. What is the second rule of the code of the elves for bonus points this morning? There's room for everyone on the nice list, right? And so there's this reality. When we look at our faith, when we look at our Jesus, when we look at him coming down, stepping into the world, what we need to understand is that true light that Jesus brings is for everyone. It's good enough, it's sufficient enough, it covers enough, it's powerful enough that Jesus can be the light for everyone. He loves his creation. He came down to show light to everyone. He is the true light. The only problem is that not everyone recognizes the true light, right? Not everyone is able to recognize and step into and see the true light that has stepped into the world. So verse 10, it says this: He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. Though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. There's this moment in creation where the God of the universe steps down onto the scene. And even though the whole world was made through him, his creation didn't recognize him. Jesus is showing up, but his creation was not able to recognize who he was. And so here's my question to you this morning. Are you able to recognize where God has been with you this year? Are you able to recognize where God has been with you this year? Think about your year. Think about your family. Think about your job. Think about your circumstances. Are you able to recognize where God has been with you? Because, listen, God is with us. He's with us. He's present. The scriptures say he's our ever-present help, even in times of trouble, right? He's present. He's with us. He's come to show his light to us. But are you in the category of people who would not be able to recognize his light, or are you able to recognize his light? Because Jesus came and he's like, there's a lot of people who weren't able to recognize my light even though they were made through my life. And so Jesus shows up in and I just want to just take us in the journey of our year maybe this year. Jesus shows up in our family, but we didn't recognize him. How did Jesus show up in your family this year? Well, I think sometimes Jesus might show up in your family, but we're stuck in a comparison to somebody else's family, so we're not able to recognize where Jesus has actually blessed our own family, right? Maybe Jesus showed up with provision, but we didn't recognize him. Jesus showed up with provision. He provided for your next step, but maybe you were so concerned about your wants, not just your needs, that you didn't recognize the provision. Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread, right? And he's provided for you every step of the way. Is everything paved out, marked out, planned out? No. But he's provided for you. He showed up in your life and he's given you a clear next step. But sometimes we miss it. We miss it. Jesus may have showed up with opportunity, but we didn't recognize him. We didn't recognize him. Because maybe that opportunity was beneath us. Yikes. Maybe that opportunity was inconvenient. Maybe that opportunity wasn't the opportunity of our dreams, but maybe it was the opportunity of our purpose. He showed up. He showed up in your family. He showed up with provision. He showed up with opportunities. Jesus shows up in our relationships, but maybe we didn't recognize him. Because we haven't been grateful for the people that God's put around us. Come on. We haven't been grateful, Vernon. We haven't been grateful in these relationships. Maybe, and let me just speak to the marriages in the room, that God showed up in your marriage, but you haven't been able to recognize Jesus in your marriage because you're consumed with your own sin. Man, that's not going to get people back to church, Pastor Dean. Maybe you haven't been able to recognize the gift of your spouse because you're consumed with yourself. Jesus is showing up. He's showing up. He's the true light. But light exposes what was in the dark, right? He's the true light where we're able to recognize him. Jesus shows up in our relationships. He shows up with opportunity. Where has Jesus showed up in your life that maybe you haven't been able to recognize? Maybe you haven't been able to see. Maybe it's that you're waiting on that undercover boss moment where he puts on the hat and he's like, I've been the boss all along, right? And I've been sitting right here with you. I've seen all the crap that your family's been going through. I've seen all the chaos that's been going on around you. I've seen what you've lost, but have you recognized what you've gained? Have you recognized my presence in your life? Have you thanked God for being with you? Man, I need that. I'm preaching that to my heart. The reality is that when Jesus stepped into his creation, he found his people being more concerned with their own standards, with their own values, and with their own priorities than they were about meeting God, about being present with God. They were more concerned with presentation than they were with God's presence. And sometimes the best way to recognize Jesus in your life is to remind yourself of your testimony. This made its way into my message this morning. That this morning, Kristen said, "Are you doing okay?" And I was like, "I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm just You're like, "Oh gosh, I thought the pastor was just supposed to jump up and start singing 'How Great Is Our God' every Sunday morning, right?" Well, I'm human and I have my own emotions and fears and anxieties. And Kristen said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'm not like terrible, but I'm not like awesome." And without saying anything else, she shared this with me after, but she said that God told her, "Don't open up your Bible, open up your journal." And she opens up her journal this morning, and she starts reading from the beginning of our calling story when God told us to move to before he even told us to move to Las Vegas, what God was doing in our story. And she reads probably 10 pages. And I'm just standing there in the bathroom, and she's in the bedroom at her desk. And I'm just hearing how God has been faithful. In the times of the greatest anxiety, times of the most unknown, and the times of the fear, I'm just hearing the page being read. And I'm like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I just put my face on, right? You're like, he uses humor as a deflection when he gets when he gets uncomfortable. Yeah, I do, okay. And I'm standing there, and I just start crying. Standing in front of the full-length mirror, right? Just like, what in the world? And she's just reading our testimony about how God had not only confirmed each step, but had provided every step of the way. And I'm just like, God, you did it then, you'll do it again. You did it then, you did it then. Why? Not because it's all about us, it's because God is with us. He's present. We want to recognize him. We want to see him. We want to see his movement. Look back on your testimony. Look back in your story. What brought you in the doors this morning? What made you pull up to a high school and go to church in a high school this morning? You know, like what made you do that? What brought you here? I believe God brought you here because he wanted to remind you today that he's with you. He was with you then. He's going to be with you again. He's with you. He brought you through it. He was with you. Verse 11, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. I remember as a teenager being with a group of friends. And I can remember when my parents would approach my group of friends. Oh, anybody know that moment? And it's like I'm standing with a group of friends and my parents start approaching. My nervousness starts going through my chest, right? And I'm like, oh gosh, like the worlds are colliding. It's like you two aren't supposed to know each other, you know? And why is that? Everybody knows that. Everybody can feel that. Those of you with teenagers know that. Teenagers in the room, you know that feeling. And the reason is because I have a different and separate identity with my group of friends than I do with my parents. And here's what happened right here in this season is that Jesus stepped in looking at his kids and they're feeling all awkward like, who is this? And they didn't receive him. They shunned him out of the circle. They're like, I don't know you, I don't know you, I don't know you, I don't know you. Right? They're like, go away, go away, go away, go away, go away, go away. Right? Why? Because their identity was separated from their parents. Their identity was separated from Jesus. Their identity was separated from their Creator. They were more concerned about the presentation than they were about the presence of God in their life. And I don't know about you, but the more I walk in life, and there's a lot of life to walk, the more I just want to be exactly where God is and recognize Him in my life and receive Him into my community and say, you light it up. You move. I want to be the one who receives Him. But Jesus said, I came to this earth and my own, not only did they not recognize me, they didn't even receive me. And I want to receive Jesus today. Are you able to receive Jesus when He shows up? Are you able to receive Him? Are you in that posture where you've said, you know what, I have been made by Jesus. I've been made on purpose for a purpose. And I want to receive my Creator so that I can walk out my created purpose. I want to receive God with me so that I can go with His power, with His peace, with His protection, with His provision. I want to receive Him. I want to receive Him today. He's gifted Himself to you today. He's gifted Himself to you today. And we're not opening the present. Like, do you know what Cannon would do? We wrapped one present for Cannon, one for Riley that are under the tree already. And I think that's just parents' way of torturing their children. Right? And so every day he's like shaking it. He's like, I don't hear anything. He's like, if we told him he could open that right now, he would run, mad dash, and rip the paper off. Because he's so excited to receive the gift, right? And we're leaving the gift. We're leaving it unwrapped. We're leaving it unopened. We're leaving our Bibles unread. We're leaving our schedules too busy to where we can't hear the voice of God. You know? Like, step in and receive the gift, but you can't receive the gift by being consumed by the presentation. You got to receive the gift by being consumed with God's presence. That's how we receive the gift. Man, today God's revealing Himself to you in a way that maybe you haven't seen before. Maybe you've been too mesmerized to recognize Him. Maybe you've been too confused to receive Him. But here's what He says in verse 12. He said, yet to all who did receive Him, to those who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. Man, you know that it's your right to be God's child. It's your right to be called a child of God. And some of you are like, man, maybe we're all God's children. And like, in a way, I know what you're saying, but what we've actually done in our own sin, we've rebelled against our Creator and we've chosen to be children of wrath, children of sin. And when Jesus stepped onto the scene, He said, if you could just recognize who I am, you just receive who I am, if you just receive my presence in your life, that belief in and of itself, His work alone, gives you the right to be called a child of God. Not anything that we did, but a posture that we took to say, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that He came to this earth 2,000 years ago. Why? He came on a mission to remind His people that I'm with you. I am with you. I'm present. I want to be there in your struggle. I want to be there in your pain. I want to be there when you feel like you don't have enough. Because I'm with you and I'm for you. And we got to remind ourselves, because He says this is what gives you the right to be called a child of God. You have the right today to be called a child of God. And maybe some of you need to hear that for the very first time this morning. Maybe you've been walking with us for a season. And you need to know this morning that you can step over that line and be called a child of God forever. That giving your heart and life to Jesus and receiving the greatest gift in all of eternity that God gave His creation would give you the right to be called a child of God. That you're His son. You're His son. You're His daughter. That He looks at you and He's proud. Why is He proud? Because He looks at you like He looks at Jesus. Not your mistakes, but who He made you to be. So this is what happens in in God's word, a lot of times, like what you see, especially in writings that are more poetic, like John 1, is you see the writers start to wrap up a narrative in one verse. And so the reason why I started with the Word become flesh and dwelt among us is because the next 5 verses took us into what that looked like for us to take the posture of receiving God's dwelling in our life. And so verse 14 fully encompasses what this looks like. And it says, the Word became flesh. He made His dwelling among us. Remember, He put on human clothes and He moved into the neighborhood. And we have seen His glory. Some didn't recognize, but today you can be the one who sees. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace, we receive, and truth, we believe. That we see God is with us. We recognize God is with us. He extends His grace to us for every terrible thing that we've done, every misthought that we've had, every misstep that we've taken. He gives you His grace today as a gift. He wraps it up and He hands it to you. And it is for us to see it and receive it, step into, receive that grace, and believe in truth. He comes full of grace and truth to deliver the greatest gift of all, and that is His presence with us. I'm just getting to the point in my life where I don't care where I go as long as I'm going with Jesus. Is that if God is not in this, we don't want this. If God is not in this next move and next step, we don't want it. If God is not leading it, we're not going, right? And so if we can just step and receive, recognize, receive, believe, this is how God enters the scene of our life today. This is how God wants to make moves in your life today. And so Jesus is close. Jesus is evident. He's beautiful. He's for you. Jesus is kind. He loves you. So here's what I want, and maybe you need to write these 3 things down, and you need some space to process them. So if you're taking notes, go ahead and write these down. If you're not taking notes, go ahead and start taking notes. Number 1, recognize the glory in His story. It says we have seen His glory. Recognize the glory in His story. What we think about in this season, we're going to step back into that one in a minute when we begin to worship again. Recognize the glory in His story. God on high became flesh for us. Wow. There's glory. Recognize the glory in His story. 2, receive His grace in our story. You cannot out-sin God's grace. You can't. You can't out-sin the bandwidth of grace that God has to extend to you. You can't do it. There was nothing you did to earn it. There's nothing you can do to lose it. That He's offering it to you. You recognize His glory. You're moved to receive His grace in your story. And number 3, believe His truth for an even greater story. Believe His truth for an even greater story. This is how you can walk into an immeasurably more season. This is how you can walk and you can hear your wife read the pages of a journal. And you can look back and see how confused and how anxious, how worried you were in a season, but reminded constantly that God was with you. And then being able to step 18 months later in a room of people that we didn't even know when we were writing these. I didn't even know you when I was hearing back the words that Kristen was writing in her journal. I didn't even know your name yet. But God did. God knew your name. He knew the name of this church. He knew the heartbeat of this place. He knew that this city needed not Joseph and Kristen, but needed Jesus. And He allows us to step into His story when we believe the truth of God's word. that Jesus came, revealed himself to us, extended his grace to us, and invited us to walk this story with him. I'm going to invite the band to come back up because we're going to step into a song where we're just able to really just practice the first point of this application, where we are able to recognize the glory in his story. Recognize the glory in what Jesus has done and revealing himself to us. Because listen, if we can step into the truth that God has for us today, John writes later in his gospel, he says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. It's all about Jesus. Christmas is all about Jesus. Our life is all about Jesus. Our relationship and where we lead is all about Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is the single greatest reminder. Jesus is the single greatest moment in history that tells us God is with us. God is with us. He showed it, he displayed it, and he invited us into it. God is with us. When I think about the story, what we're talking about, Word becoming flesh, Jesus being born. There were different people in the story of Christmas that Jesus' coming was revealed to. One group of these people, they were the Magi. They were wise men. And just by trade, they were thinkers, but they were also astronomers. They studied the stars. And when you think about it, it said in verse 9 that Jesus was the true light for everyone, right? And you think about the lights that God has populated our sky with. All stars. Jesus is the true light for everyone. And so as Jesus was coming on the scene by way of a baby, God revealed himself to a group of men who studied the stars. And he said, there's coming a king. That I'm coming. God is going to be with you. And I want you to chase this star until you find him. And I want you to bow down and worship him. He's the true light. He's the true light for all mankind. Matthew chapter 1 says this. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star. They saw. They recognized. We saw his star when he rose, and we've come to worship. After listening to the king, they went on their way. They had this conversation with Herod. We'll talk about that some other time. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. And opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. This story of God coming to the scene is something that really just blows my mind. And I want us to just sit and recognize the glory, the testimony of this story. So just with every head bowed and every eye closed, I just want us to go before God in prayer right now. And just ask Jesus right now in this moment to help you recognize the glory in his story. Ask him to help you recognize it. Jesus, it's a miracle that you came. You came by way of a courageous young lady named Mary. who as a virgin carried the Son of God, gave birth to him in a humble stable. And he was visited by shepherds and these wise men who chased the star because they recognized the true light. I want to be mesmerized by your miracle today, God. And I want to receive your grace. So just across this room, if you're in a place where you want to receive the grace of God for the very first time, you can do that. So if you confess that Jesus is Lord, so Jesus, you're Lord of my life, I want to make you Lord of my life. Believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, that he lived a perfect life, and he died the death that you deserve because of our sin. And then God rose him from the grave on the third day. You confess with your mouth, you believe in your heart, you will be saved. You can do that today. I'd love to talk with you after service about it. So if you've recognized his glory, you receive his grace. Let's take that step to believe the truth that Jesus is God with us. Let's continue to worship him this morning.